Add excitement to your holidays with Ohio Lottery Holiday Scratch-Offs, including $1 holiday cash and $5 holiday lucky times 10, or Holiday Bonus Millions with a 200 times multiplier and a $2 million top prize. Plus, enjoy second chance drawings where you can win 10 times, 100 times, or 1,000 times the price of your ticket. Scratch-offs make the perfect gift, and best of all, there's no wrapping required. Lottery players are subject to Ohio laws and commission regulations. Play responsibly.
Welcome to Mind Love, episode 315. Today's episode is all about the illusion of separateness, Buddhism's teaching on loneliness, love, and human connection.
And she said, "Oh, so you're a lone wolf?" And I said, "Yes." I remember feeling such pride. And she said, "Oh, and the thing is about lone wolves is that they are sick. Wolves are pack animals and they need each other." I had to change my life. And it just really showed me where I needed to learn and lean in. Coming from kind of the traumatic background that I do, where I experienced as a child, emotional and physical and sexual violence, so much violence that to do the opposite was to learn how to trust and learn how to belong and learn to be uncomfortable and comfortable at the same time, or to be really afraid and at ease at the same time. Learning how to hold what I thought didn't go together.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
If this is your first time giving your mind a little love, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Mind love is a habit, and the more you give your mind that love and intention, the better you'll feel about yourself and your life. Plus, it's really a win-win because more subscribers means Mind Love attracts even more amazing guests to bring you their wisdom. So don't forget to subscribe. Have you ever felt like you're the only person in a crowded room? Like you're surrounded by people, but you still feel some sense of isolation. I've felt this as long as I can remember. I always wondered if it was because I was an only child, or because I moved around a lot. I was always adapting to new schools, new friends, and even new family dynamics because my parents were divorced. It's like I was always starting over. But maybe it wasn't just me. I remember wondering, do other people feel this way too? Like they're alone even when they're not? My most recent spiritual exploration has been A Course in Miracles. And the Course says that it's all in our heads, literally. One of the big ideas is that our first mistake as humans is thinking we're separate from everyone and everything else. According to ACIM, this feeling of being separate from everyone else, and even from what some call God, is just an illusion. It's like our minds are playing tricks on us, making us believe that we're all alone in this vast universe, when the true reality is that we are the universe. Remember Erin Worley from episode 185? She's the spiritual channeler who wrote I Am, I Create. Her channeled conversations kept circling back to one big idea, that we are always creating our reality. So if our first thought is that we're separate, boom, that's what we create. An ego that thrives on feeling separate and special. ACIM says that there's no such thing as a neutral thought. Every thought we have either pulls us away from or nudges us closer to our true divine nature. So our ultimate goal in this life is to dissolve the idea of separateness. Mind-blowing, right? But hold on. This isn't just an ACIM thing. Buddhism is on the same page. It says that thinking we're all separate is just us being delusional. This delusion is one of the 3 poisons that keep us stuck in a cycle of suffering, or samsara. So the way out is to break down that illusion and see that we're all interconnected. But let's get real for a second. Loneliness isn't just a feeling. It's actually a public health issue. A study in Perspectives on Psychological Science found that feeling isolated can increase your risk of dying early by 29%. That's huge. So, whether it's ACIM or Buddhism, the message is clear. This illusion of separateness isn't just messing with our heads, it's messing with our lives. So, what if that lonely feeling is actually a sign? A nudge to look deeper and see how we're all connected? Well, that's what we're diving into today. Loneliness, love, and human connection, all from a Buddhist perspective. Sensei Koshin Paley Ellison is a renowned thought leader, author, Zen teacher, and Jungian psychotherapist. Koshin co-founded the New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care, and he's also the author of Untangled, Walking the Eightfold Path to Clarity, Courage, and Compassion. 3 key things we will learn are how to shift your focus from external events to your personal growth, how to align your dreams and goals to higher guidance, and Buddhism's path to overcoming isolation and finding connection. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up or text the word morning to 33777. And now let's welcome Koshin Paley Ellison to the show.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
So I've been going through your book. I absolutely love just the way that it's organized and the personal stories that are in it. So I'm curious, what does it mean to be untangled, and what inspired this topic for your book?
Yeah. So we live in a world where many of us talk about trauma, and I myself talk about trauma, and we struggle with things, and terrible things happen. And also, then those things get caught in our minds, and we have trouble getting out of them. And that's definitely been my experience. And I was just reflecting, as someone who practices Buddhism and who finds great solace and focus and compassion through that tradition, I just wondered, where does it come from? And in our tradition, and really the historical Buddha used a different word instead of trauma. He just said that we suffer and we get entangled. And I remember I think I was 17 years old, I went to this retreat with Jack Kornfield, who's a meditation teacher, and he was saying, the whole world is tangled in a tangle. Who will untangle this tangle? And I remember thinking, wow, that means this has been going on for a long time, because I was still caught in how this was my experience. And kind of that song, like, nobody knows the troubles that I've seen. I was still caught in my version of this is my struggle, not all of our struggle. And so we can all learn to untangle this kind of mess and crossed wires that we have, and learn how to work with it in a loving and rigorous and vital way.
I find it interesting that it seems like, depending on what I'm going through, the universe, God, however you want to look at it, sends me all these things. Like, I always know which direction I'm going towards because it becomes so obvious, at least now, maybe not in the beginning. And recently, I have been sent a lot of information on re-examining my trauma, or maybe redefining it. And there was a time where understanding what my traumatic events were was really helpful. And so I think now maybe I'm just at a different stage in processing that, but I'm getting a lot of messages that I can just look at it in a different way. I don't need to always be sifting through it, figuring it out, understanding where it came from, who gave it to me, who did what to do, in order to heal from it. And so I think maybe I needed a little understanding, or maybe that's just where I was at the time. But now I'm just trying to see it all through a new lens and not necessarily identify with the trauma of it. So I like what you said a minute ago about how Buddha just called it suffering. Does he make any distinction between trauma or suffering, or is it all just under that umbrella?
As far as I know, he didn't use that word, but that's just my ignorance. And but but I think that he used words like suffering and used words like entangled, and that we get caught in our stuff, that we and also we get caught in it because we want more of something, we want what we don't have, or we wish that we had what we used to have, or I could talk about them in the book as these three giants. And the one is like resentments, like we hold on to this kind of very embittered view about that what we've expected from the world, or what we've expected from our parents or partners or friends or work, or all of these different things, this kind of entitlement that we can all get caught in and feel resentful because we're not getting what we get when we want it. And the other one is like the deep thing right now in particular, which is the delusion. And the main delusion that I think that most of us face is that we think that we're separate. Like I was sharing, like how it was such a revelation to me that other people struggled too. Like I was feeling so alone in that when I was a young person. And the fundamental delusion of our own separateness. And I was just thinking about that study that came out a few months ago that said in the United States right now, 35% of people report not having a single friend.
Wow.
35% of people. And 10 years before that, it was 25%. So it's like grown enormously. And the other disturbing part of that is that those people didn't necessarily live alone. And so there are also people who are married or have children. And so it's just very moving to feel like that they don't have a friend. So like that people don't really know them or really are showing up for them. And talk about loneliness. Sometimes it's lonelier to be with others than to be actually physically alone. And so I think that teaching is also something that we can get caught in, entangled in, like, and telling the story of like, I'm so screwed up or I feel so alone. And we forget that we can actually change. We can actually make an effort and really summon up some energy to do something new. And that we can learn how to step out of our comfort zone of even feeling bad. Because I think that one of the things that I've seen both as a psychotherapist and as a monk, and as a teacher and as a human, is that many of us, we, including myself, could get really caught in this feeling of really being comfortable in our suffering, comfortable in our entanglement. I remember in my teenage years, I felt I was very excited to be a lone wolf and that no one could get close to me. And, a lot of people, I had friends, but no one was close. And I didn't let anyone really know what was happening inside because I was hurting so much. And so I, over identified as this lone wolf, and I remember being on a bus around that same time I heard the Untangled story, and I had my beads on. I was 18 years old on a Greyhound bus, I think. I don't know if those still exist, but maybe.
Oh, I have a big history with those buses.
There you go. Yeah, so it's a very specific thing. And the woman next to me looked at me and she said, "Oh, are you a Buddhist or something?" And I remember thinking yeah, I'm Buddhist. I remember really enjoying that a lot. And she said, "Oh, so who do you study with?" And I said, "Oh, Sharon Salzberg and Jack Kornfield, these different people." And she's like, "Oh, so what community do you belong to?" And I said, "I don't belong to a community." And she said, "Oh, so you're a lone wolf." And I said, "Yes." I remember feeling such pride and joy in saying yes and being recognized as such. And she said, "Oh, and the thing is about lone wolves is that they are sick. Wolves are pack animals and they need each other." And I remember thinking, oh shit, I had to change my life. That I actually was running with this kind of narrative that actually did not really feel good, but I thought it felt good. Like that I don't need anyone, I don't really belong, no one can kind of harness me in. And it just really showed me where I needed to learn and lean in and to do something new and to get, to me, coming from the kind of the traumatic background that I do, where I experienced as a child, emotional and physical and sexual violence, so much violence that to do the opposite was to learn how to trust and learn how to belong and learn to be uncomfortable and comfortable at the same time, or to be really afraid and at ease at the same time. Learning how to hold what I thought didn't go together has been and continues to be a great path of amazement to me.
Do you think you had to go through that lone wolf stage to have that realization?
Yeah, totally. Like I don't begrudge the lone wolf. Like I think that I was in that stage for a really good, it was a survival. It was trying to keep myself away from danger. And I knew danger. I knew great violence. And I knew manipulation and all of those things. And I knew how horrible that had felt and that it drove me to, almost, dying by suicide when I was a teenager. And so several times. And so I think that, yes, the lone wolf and I think it was more accurate than I knew that it was a sickness too, that I had to do, that I had to leave the pack that I was with. And because the pack that I was with was making me sick, and that I needed to find a new pack. Yeah.
You know what's funny? We spend so much time feeding our minds, reading books, listening to podcasts, learning new things, but then we grab whatever's convenient to feed our bodies. And I get it. Life is busy, and sometimes a drive-through feels like the only option. But that's why I take Field of Greens. It's a greens powder made with whole organic fruits and vegetables. No extracts, no lab-made stuff, and just 1 scoop a day gives you simple, real nutrition. Field of Greens feeds your body with fruits and vegetables medically chosen to support your heart, vital organs, and immune system. And let me tell you something. Since I started taking it, I've noticed these little changes that show me how nutrient depleted I must have been before. Like the ridges in my nails, gone. My sleep, so much better. And my stomach just feels happy. You know that dreaded afternoon crash that has you reaching for more coffee or sugary snacks? Well, that's not happening for me anymore. When your body is actually nourished, it runs so much better. I've tried other greens powders before, but Field of Greens is genuinely different. The quality is next level and you can taste it. It's become my go-to, especially on those days when my eating isn't exactly Instagram worthy, because we all have those days, right? And here's the thing. They are so confident that you'll love it too, that they offer a 100% money-back guarantee. That's how much they believe in their product. So I got you 15% off your first order and free rush shipping. Visit fieldofgreens.com and use promo code MINDLOVE. That's promo code MINDLOVE at fieldofgreens.com. fieldofgreens.com. I don't know why it took me so long to invest in good bedding. I resisted it for years, but something flipped in me about 3 years ago. And now I'm basically a pillow connoisseur. I've tried them all, and I get weirdly excited about good bedding. Because here's the thing, we spend a third of our lives in bed, and the quality of that time affects literally everything else, which is why I'm so excited to tell you about my latest obsession, Lagoon Sleep Pillows. What sets them apart is their matching system. You take a quick 2-minute quiz about your sleep style and your preferences, and then they match you with your perfect pillow. I was matched with their otter pillow, and I am so impressed. Lately, I've just needed more support, and this seems to cradle me in all the right places. I'm also low-key obsessed with their travel pillow, which I use for way more than just travel. I actually hug it, use it as leg support, and of course, take it on trips with me. Well, the secret is in their adjustable fill. You can add or remove it to get that perfect alignment for your spine. A study even found that the right supportive pillow can improve sleep quality by 63%. And Lagoon lets you try their matched pillow for 100 nights risk-free. Free returns, no questions asked. Falling asleep has never been easier. I toss and turn less and just wake up feeling refreshed every morning. Go to lagoonsleep.com and take their awesome 2-minute sleep quiz to find your match. Use the code MIND for 15% off your first purchase.
I went through something so similar in college and my early 20s. And it's interesting what you brought up earlier with that study of 35% of people saying they don't have a friend, but a lot of them didn't live alone. And it makes me wonder, so are people not getting close enough? Like, is the opportunity not there? Or is that the narrative within that person that says, I don't have any friends? And I say that because I remember being in my late 20s and thinking, I feel like I don't have any friends. Like, I don't have real friends. I had plenty of people to hang out with, but I didn't really have people that the people that I felt comfortable calling when I needed them weren't necessarily there for me. So I was leaning towards the wrong groups of friends. But I look back now and I've definitely overhauled my life. Now I live completely differently. I live as being a good friend. That was a big switch for me. I'm like, why isn't anyone there for me? And meanwhile, somebody calls and asks me for help and I'm too busy or I don't text back. So that was a big change. But some of my closest friends now were there through that time. I met them before that time. And like I said, the opportunity for deep friendships was just waiting for me if I chose to see it, if I chose to engage in the friendship in that way. And I think so often that's the case where it's like, oh gosh, we need to change our whole lives because I'm doing this wrong. When really, I didn't need to change that much. I just needed to see what was in front of me and recognize which were opportunities and which were energy sucks and kind of spend more time there, spend more effort there, be the friend that I wanted to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, that's quite beautiful. I think it's really important to like, because what we can't control the outcome of things, right? And there's this wonderful, amazing woman teacher in Japan named Oyama Roshi, and she's just awesome. And she always says, what we can work with is how do we create the good conditions? And so I think that it's really important, like you're saying, how do you make the like kind of knead the dough of like, how do I become a good friend? How do I become that which I also need? And where I also, I really explore in the book about that, the experience of generosity is when we are giving and receiving equally. So you're not depleted, just like trying to please other people, but you're also nourishing yourself as much as you're nourishing others. So learning how, as you're saying, to be a good friend.
A lot of your book talks about the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. Give us a synopsis of what that is.
So let me back up a tiny bit. And so like the book is half of it is about the Eightfold Path, but I think that I just want to back up a little bit, if that's okay too.
Yeah.
So the Buddha was just some person, right? Like you or me, trying to figure it out. And at a certain point, he lived a kind of sheltered life where, kind of maybe always on Instagram and like he like I always picture like him putting the phone down and like looking out like, whoa, what's actually going on here? And he encountered old age, sickness, and death kind of famously. And so he was like, whoa, like that's happens to life, that's part of life. I thought it was about pleasure and happiness. And someone told him, yeah, like that's kind of the three things you can count on. Like those are going to happen. You're going to age, you're going to get sick and you're going to die. And he was like, well, then what's this all about? And so he went on this path to figure it out. And so he tried a lot of different spiritual things, at that time. And, I always think of like he went to a Pilates studio. It was a contemporary story. He went to a Pilates studio. He went to a yoga class. He listened to some podcasts. He went on some retreats.
Sounds like me.
And great, and wonderful things to do. And at a certain point, though, he realized, like, I'm still not addressing my fear. And so he sat under this tree and he decided, I'm going to sit here until I face all of the things I'm afraid of basically that everything is changing. And so he did. And what he realized, he was that he said, oh, house builder, you are seen at last. The ridgepole is shattered. Nevermore will you build a house of sorrow. So what he saw was like it was himself who was creating this house of sorrow, which I love that expression so much, and so in some ways you could say what we'll get to in a couple minutes is that this Eightfold Path is about the path out of sorrow. And the sorrow is how we keep replicating how terrible we feel. And his first teaching was these 4 nobilities, which blew my mind. When I was about 9 years old, I was reading in our Encyclopedia Britannica, which used to be these books,
I had those.
And they're amazing. And I remember reading about Buddhism when I was about 9 years old, and I remember the 4 noble truths. And I was like, whoa, the 4 noble truths. And the first nobility, it said, was that there's suffering. And I remember as a very young person, like I was 9, like a little person, I remember thinking, thank you, because these terrible things were happening in our house. And I remember like, this is like the first person I felt like telling the truth, like some bad shit happens, that there's suffering in the world and there's a nobility to saying that, we don't stay there, but it's true, right? And the second nobility, as I describe in my book, is these 3 giants of greed and resentment and delusion. Wow. I remember thinking my mind was like blowing up because like there was this map of how to work with things. And then the third nobility is change. We can change. How amazing is that? I mean, I still can remember the feeling in my body, like reading those words, like how exhilarating. And the fourth was the nobility of path, of the Eightfold Path, that there's these 8 aspects. Like, wow. And so the beauty of the Eightfold Path is it really lays out essentially the combination of how to work with your mind and concentration, as well as your actions really matter. So how to work with your speech, how to work with your work, how to work with, your body. And so they like very kind of foundational, kind of super grounded ways of like just reflecting on. For example, I often think about the nobility of speech. And the Buddha asks us to think about like, if what I'm about to say, is it kind? Is it helpful? Does it need to be said? Those are just some of the things he encouraged us just to reflect on. Like imagine if we all reflected a bit on what we said, both to ourselves, those repetitive little ruminations, like, is this kind? Is this helpful? Is this needed? It's a good question and a helpful question. So, yeah. So it's pretty amazing, I think. And I think that so the Eightfold Path, I really wanted to move into it and really look at each of these things like speech, for example, or our livelihood, and to really reflect on like, how am I working with this in the middle of my life? At the grocery store, at the bank, like even we're still have to wait on lines at the ATM. Like we still have to engage life and other people, or driving down the street. So the Eightfold Path for me is, how do you live in a liberated way in the midst of raising children and grocery shopping? Yeah.
It's funny that you use those examples because just the other day, I was just playing around with feeling anything that came up, like being hyper aware of anything that came up while I was running errands. And I just had to make some UPS returns, go to the grocery store and pick up something from the post office. Those are the only three things. And I was almost astonished at how many emotions I felt doing these three mundane things, like the person at UPS not having her Amazon return codes ready and standing there trying to sift through them, trying to figure it out while there were four people in line. The amount of judgment I had for this woman, the feelings in my chest of like, can I speed her up? Like, it's so funny. But it happened a bunch. And so by the time I ended up at the post office, I was playing around with what I could exude rather than just being at the mercy of every situation. Could I somehow exude a sense of love or peace towards people? So I just had this like heart expansion. I was walking by, smiling at people, got a lot of smiles back, got some side eyes. And I was like, I got to my car and I sat there and I was like, well, that was interesting. And I was like, I still had a lot of expectations throughout it. There was always another layer to be worked on, no matter what it was. I'm like, yeah, I didn't feel as up and down, but I did wonder where the side eye came from. Why did he not meet he saw my gaze and he moved away too quickly? And, and I was just kind of laughing at like, what is human nature doing the mundane things? But it just was a reminder that literally every moment there is something there for our growth, for our healing. And it varies for every person. It varies for me moment by moment, depending on what I'm going through, depending on where my thoughts are at. But there's just always an opportunity. And when I was in LA, I moved to the mountains a couple years ago. But when I was in LA, I was seeking those opportunities as all these like different paid events. This seminar I have to go to, this thing I have to go to. And being in the mountains, I do a lot of walks by myself. Like I said, I have to pick up my mail at the post office. It's a whole thing. So like it's these more mundane moments, but I swear I have found more things to work with just in those everyday moments. Of course, I gained inspiration from certain things that I went to, but I think the more that I did that, it kept reinforcing this idea that I needed something external for my growth rather than it just being right here in the everyday moments. And it really does, for me, for most people, I'm assuming, start with thoughts. Like we think it's the emotions because those are the big things for me for a while, like these feelings of depression or getting too triggered or whatever it is. But playing around, I've been going through A Course in Miracles this year. So my audience will probably hear a lot about that because I'm only on day 40 and there's a whole year of activities, but really working with my thoughts more than I ever have. And I've worked with my thoughts for a good decade, but this is in a very specific way. And just the other day, I told my husband, I'm like, I am not used to feeling this much joy without being on a substance. And that's been a really long time ago that I did that. But I was like, oh my gosh, I just feel like we're like in the forest and I was playing with my children. I was like, I feel so elated right now. I can cry. And it's been like 40 days of being so careful about entertaining which thoughts I entertain. In A Course in Miracles, it said something about like we're too lenient with our thoughts. We let our minds just kind of cling on to these things. And so like, what would life really be like if the moment I realized I was thinking about something negative, if I rerouted it? And life is unfolding in a way where, yes, everything's sort of the same. I guess we're also moving. There's a bunch of good things that are coming up that have all happened in the last 30 days. So could be due to this thought revamping, but those things don't even matter as much because all of a sudden I am more content in the house that I live in, even though that we're moving. So excited about this, so joyful with just a smile that comes back from my baby. It's been really, really incredible. But one of the big things you talk about is just that, the interconnectedness of emotions, thoughts, and actions. Can you go deeper in that? We're all searching for something better in life, right? Better habits, better mindset, better relationships. But when it comes to hiring, searching isn't always the best approach. Instead of searching, why not match? That's where Indeed comes in. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. It's your go-to matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors. Their matching engine helps you find quality candidates fast. And I mean really fast. Did you know that in the minute I've been talking to you, 23 hires were made on Indeed worldwide? That's what I love about Indeed. It's like having a mindful hiring assistant. Instead of getting overwhelmed by endless resumes, you can schedule, screen, and message candidates all in one place. The platform actually learns your preferences, so the more you use it, the better it gets at finding people who align with your vision. And get this, 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. That's why more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide use Indeed to hire great talent fast. I just love that it keeps all of my hiring processes organized. I can do everything right there instead of having spreadsheets and notes and video call links. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/mindlove. Just go to Indeed.com/mindlove right now and support the show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/mindlove. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. But one of the big things you talk about is just that, the interconnectedness of emotions, thoughts, and actions. Can you go deeper in that?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm just really appreciating like how you're working with your mind and also what you experience when we do. First of all, what I'm also hearing from what you're saying is discipline, like that you have a discipline. And I used to also think that no discipline was freedom. But actually, I found that there's much more freedom in discipline, you know. And actually, these days, I have like quite a morning ritual where I don't really leave the house until I've gone to the gym downstairs for an hour, and I've meditated for 30 minutes, made breakfast, like all of these different things, and held my beloved's face in my hands and let him know how much I love him. Just never leave the house without that. And but it's thoughts, words, and actions. Yes, we must work. I mean, for me, rumination is a place of practice. It's a rumination, like where we often just in our thoughts, we're just like going over and over and over something. And that's turns out to be very popular. And I think what you're describing is kind of getting off that wheel and where you're not ruminating, you're actually experiencing what you're experiencing while you experience it. And so that thoughts, words, and actions to me is like starting to like really look at when you're really allowing yourself to kind of get out of the river of thoughts and feelings. So you're not just swimming in them, but you're able to see them and you're able to experience them. And you're like, wow, look at that feeling, or look at that thought. Like, that's a wonderful thought. That's a crazy thought. That's a neutral thought, whatever that is, or feelings the same way. We're not just thrown by them. Or to me, it's kind of like being that strong pillar in the middle of a carousel where the horses are going up and down and around, and we're able to actually be still in the midst of the turning and ups and downs. And it doesn't mean the horses are good or bad. It's just like they're horses. So to me, that's a really powerful way to begin to learn how to work with our thoughts, is actually just start to see them and just moving around and going up and down and all around and spinning. And then learning how to, like, as I was talking about earlier, really learning how to use my language differently. And really, as the Buddha talked about that our actions are our only true belongings. Like in the end, or as the great Maya Angelou said, they're never going to remember, what you said, but they're going to remember how you made them feel. And it's such a beautiful teaching to me. It's about like, how am I living my life now? And am I complete in my relationships? Am I acting in a way that is appropriate and loving? Here at the Zen Center, we have the opportunity to work with lots of dying people and people who know that they're dying, and all the time the message is so clear that people's regrets in their life is like, what was I doing with my time? What was I like? I was so distracted. I was so afraid. I was hesitating for decades. And that usually is the great regret. And they're like, why wasn't I loving people more? Why was I, giving myself more fully to life and relationship? It's so beautiful. And I remember one of I wrote about her too in this book, this woman, Rose Tisnado, she was so amazing. And she said, just before she's dying, she's like, promise me one thing. And I said, sure, Rose, what is that? She said, just don't hold back from living, and that, what a beautiful teaching. So if we think about our thoughts, if we get caught up in our rumination, we're not going to be able to, we'll be holding back. And if we're just kind of clumsy with our words and careless, it's actually a way of holding back from saying what is most true and what is most urgent and most useful. And to me, usually then those become our reality and becomes what we do with ourselves. I know myself and many people, have all these self-limiting ideas. Oh, I'm not that kind of person. I'm this kind of person, or I'm someone who's been very hurt, or, I know I wore that as a strong badge for well into my 20s, like I'm a victim. And I wore that as an identity, as opposed to, yes, terrible things happen and so many wonderful things. But I was kind of like put my life in a tube as if it was one thing. And I had to really, it was actually through the looking at, how am I thinking about this actually? And what am I saying to myself and others about it? And what am I actually doing? It was actually the liberation of thoughts, words, and actions as the medicine for the kind of more harmful thoughts, words, and actions that I was doing. Does that make sense?
It does, definitely.
Mm.
When I was in my 20s, even now, I've always been kind of a tech nerd. I like to be an early adopter with new technologies. It's weird now because now I'm very aware of a lot of the negative sides. So I'm like, I really want to early adopt this, but also maybe I don't want to do it at all. Not the point. The point is, I remember at one point, I've always kind of been obsessed with tracking things, but rarely end up following through. I used to think that was a discipline problem. Now I think it was my higher self telling me it was a waste of time. However, one of these things that I really wanted to track is I realized how often I'd have a question and I'd like go down a rabbit hole looking it up online. And then I'd have another question and whatever. And I was like, I wish there was some app where you could just like write in all of the questions. I guess I could have done this on a notepad, but it just made it easy to look up later. Then I realized some random unknown developer did create this app. It had like no downloads. I downloaded it, worked pretty well. You could just kind of speak into it. It would save it. And so for like 5 days, instead of looking stuff up, I just put a pin in it. Well, I went back when I had the time and I was looking at my list and I was like, these are all the dumbest questions, the most useless things ever. Thank God I did not waste time on them. How many hours have I been wasting on this? But it was one of those aha moments for me where I'm like, this is what they keep saying in the yoga classes about just letting some of your thoughts float by. Just because I have the question does not mean the answer is pertinent to my life. And so now the amount of time I feel like I have to spend more time talking myself out of looking things up than I do actually making sure I know the answer to every question that comes to my mind. But it just goes to show that we, in the moment, whatever thoughts that we're having feel so important. Like we need to know this answer, whether it's like, is this celebrity still alive? Who is their mom? Or like, that one story that we keep telling ourselves about something horrible that happened to us. And it's like, well, what would really happen if we just rerouted that? If we just shoveled it to the side, put it in this app that we're never going to go back in, maybe learn to release it altogether before even taking that step, and just decided that I'm going to think about something else. My husband did something the other day that I was like, ooh, that was inspiring. I can't remember what it was, but we were doing something and he started to like get off track and like, oh, I need to look this up. And he goes, no, I need to focus my efforts. And then he just like went back to what he should have been doing. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, what if we could always do that with our dreams or goals, and not even just about like that next material thing? For me, especially the last 2 years, my dreams or goals are nothing like they used to be. They used to be so material focused and then achievement focused. And now they're very spiritual. It's more like, who do I want to be? And then from that place, let me see what I could create. So it's more like a curiosity, asking for guidance in every moment. And people can look at that how they want. Is it from your higher self? Is it from a higher power? To me, it's kind of one and the same. But I definitely have had times in my life where I'm sort of blocked from viewing it certain ways, and like thinking of it as the universe or source feels really right, or thinking of it as a prayer feels right versus an intention or whatever. And so whatever works for me in that moment, it evolves and shifts. But what would happen if I had the same discipline in my mind as I do with my body? I love fitness and eating healthy. And so just in playing with that, like I said, has really has been unfolding my life in a different way. Whereas I'm in the exact same circumstances I was 3 months ago, and it feels completely different. And it reminds me of something that you talk about that it's something I've been focusing on a lot too, the idea of delusion and seeing the world through a distorted lens. Because I've been in this house through 2 different pregnancies, through 2 different postpartum phases, and I will tell you, there's a lot of emotions that go up and down. There's times that I've been sitting in my living room where I'm like, we need more space. I hate this place. And now, like I said, we're moving, but I've been looking around and I'm like, this place is so beautiful. It was so good to us. It was perfect for what we needed. I'm like, it's the exact same place. Nothing has changed.
Well, except everything's changed.
So tell us about that distorted lens. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like a giant, I think of those, giants exist in every world culture, and where there's just like these exaggerated forms of things. And so like we get so caught up in our bullshit about how we think things are. It's what happens when we believe a thought is a truth. I think it was a Saturday Night Live thing where it becomes truthy, like we see things as, and that's really the beginning of suffering, right? When we begin to see a delusion of even like I am alone, for example, is a delusion. I may feel alone, right? I may be alone in a room, but I am not alone in the world. The world is so vast and wide. Or the delusion, for example, that I had of being a victim was not true. I mean, it was true that I had terrible experiences, that I was, in those experiences, I was a victim of violence, right? And gun violence and all kinds of things. So those are true events, but they were not who I am. So like when we make anything into who I am, that becomes super distorted and not even possible, because I was defining myself according to one event, right? So how do we understand and kind of begin to cut through? There's this quality in Buddhism called manjushri, and manjushri is the one part of all of us that has a flaming sword and can kind of cut through our bullshit, actually, and learning how to like that. And that quality is thought to be what wisdom is where we can kind of cut through our crap, all those ideas that we have, like I'm not you, or I live on this coast and you live on that coast. Like that's just temporary. And so creating these truths is actually, to me, a way that I definitely know in myself was super painful. I remember, if we get caught in that, we can't see new things. And I remember in these moments where, in my greatest despair, like where I was not able to see new things, I could not be curious about other people and things. And it's really important in some ways if we think about, often depression and anxiety are good friends. And one of the great antidotes to anxiety is curiosity. And to me, the great antidote of delusion is also curiosity. Like if I ever think like I know what it is, I'm in trouble. So like really learning how to see new things. I remember this is something I learned from my grandpa George. My grandpa George was like this like amazing human being. And he used to save all these National Geographic magazines, which I don't know if exist anymore either. Like, remember Encyclopedia Britannica?
I think
there
they
were
do
also
still exist because
magazines.
my mother-in-law gets them.
Amazing. And they were so cool. But at that time, in the 70s, there was lost native tribes in almost every issue. There was like lost native tribes. And every once in a while, they'd profile a city. And it was like so cool. Like they just all these beautiful photographs of cities. And this one, I used to go out to see my grandfather in Newport Beach. And he had this like white shag carpet, and we'd lay down on the white shag carpet and look through the magazine. I remember turning this page and just seeing, wow, it was a profile of Tokyo. And on this page was this picture of this monk in this like big bamboo hat where you can really see his eyes and a little slight smile, really still on the street. And all the other people were blurred. And I remember reading the captions that Zen Buddhist monk in Tokyo. And I was like, I want to be that. Because I felt like actually like that's also what's required to get out of delusion, is to like get still, be still in your body and your mind. Put down your stuff. Put down what you wished it was or what you think it is, and put it down and just be still. It was so beautiful and so amazing. I remember going home from that trip and telling my mom I wanted to grow up to be a Zen Buddhist monk because I was so inspired by what I saw. And it turns out I did.
Nice work.
This episode is brought to you by Etsy.
Oh.
Hear that?
Okay. Thank you.
Etsy knows these aren't the sounds of holiday gifting. Well, not the ones you're hoping for. You want squeals of delight. Happy tears.
How did you?
And spontaneously written songs of joy.
I am so happy. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, the song needs a bit of work, but anyway, to get those reactions, make sure everyone on your list feels heard with handmade, handpicked, and designed gifts from small shops on Etsy. Gifts like personalized jewelry, custom artwork, cozy style items, vintage pieces, and home decor to celebrate all of your favorite people and their specific kind of special. For original gifts that say, I get you, Etsy has it.
I didn't become any of the things I said I was going to become when I was younger.
But
I'm okay with that.
Not yet.
No, I'm okay with that. I decided a baby animal trainer combined with a writer wasn't necessarily my path that I wanted to be at all. Maybe I'll be a writer though. That I'm working on. I'm working on a book. So
see, there's something.
When I was reading your book, you talked about right perspective, and it stood out to me because it's something that is talked about a lot in the Course in Miracles as well. But it's not about adhering to specific beliefs or doctrines, but it's actually more about seeing reality as it truly is, free of delusions and misconceptions and things like that. That's a hard one for a lot of people to understand because they're like, but no, I see all the pain and the suffering in the world. I see these horrible things. I remember putting out, I have a daily email called the Morning Mind Love that just has like a little piece of wisdom for the day, kind of like opening a fortune cookie in your email, but a little longer. And one of them was something about a spiritual perspective I was looking into, and it was all about how there is no right and wrong. It's our perception of something that is. And somebody wrote back, a couple people actually, pretty heated. How can you say that when there's this going on and there's trafficking and there's this and it's like a truth that I know in my heart and also have a hard time explaining. How would you explain that, the idea of right perspective?
Yeah, it is a juicy one. And for me, it is like we have this little, sometimes called the little blue dot, right? The earth that we're on for the time being. And on that earth are volcanoes and toxic dumps and terrible wars and incredible wildflowers and whales. And there are, you know, murders and rapes and terrible, yeah, and trafficking. And then there's also sunrises and sunsets and palm trees. And it's all true. And to me, the delusion is to think that any one thing is what the truth is. When the world is so vast and wide, the perspective, I think, is critical to understand that any one thing is not the thing. You know, that even the earth, like if you kind of go out, if you ever go to a planetarium and kind of have that experience, like the earth itself, we think that it's like the center of everything. And it's just like happens to be a planet that we happen to live on in this incredible, vast array. So like, I don't know if you saw those like James Webb telescope images. Have you seen them?
I don't know
Yeah,
exactly if I've seen
they
those.
call them
but-
like, check it out. Everyone check it out. Like it's so amazing. And basically like they have this super powerful telescope that like looked at this like little fraction of what we can see with our eye. And it's like shows these like, it's mind blowing what it shows. And so to me, it's so humbling just to remember that even the earth itself is not the right perspective. It's important, I think, from our perspective, to take care of it the best we can and to do what we can. But to remember, like, this is just also the earth itself is not the right perspective from a kind of more holistic view. We just tend to be kind of species focused. We tend to be thinking about our species and like we're the right way. But the reality is like, yeah, and people want to think like, oh, you know, but you're not seeing all of the terrible things. Well, you know, here in New York City, there is the opportunity to see it all, you know. And so even on my block, you know, where there are amazing gardens on our block, it's so beautiful and like such great care. And then there's like dog shit and trash, you know, like it's all there, like from the micro to the macro, you know, like that. I think that we just kind of want to see one thing. And it does remind me of one story. And so like there's a story where in Japan where I don't know if it's true or not, but like the story goes that this Zen teacher was in this little town in Japan and someone comes to visit him and says, oh, you know, what's this town like? I'm moving here for the first time. And he said, oh, tell me what your town is like. And they're like, oh, well, our town, everyone's so mean and like terrible and screwed up. And he's like, oh, people are just like that here. And then the next person comes to see him and he says the same thing. Oh, tell me where it's like, where you're from. And she says, oh, it's so wonderful. You know, people are so friendly and so giving and everyone's helping out. And he's like, yeah, people are like that here too. So much depends on our perspective and we bring it everywhere. So, like, I know that I have a neighbor that I was walking down the street with this morning, and they just saw the dog shit, right? So, is that the right perspective, or is seeing the flowers the right perspective? The beautiful gardens. I mean, really beautiful, So it's so interesting, and to me, the beauty is learning how to hold it all. It's like, yeah, yeah, there's dog shit, and there's beautiful gardens. There's toxic dumps, and mind blowing paradisical beauty. It's all together. And so to me, it's like, how do you open your mind to hold the beautiful, complex view, right perspective?
I have someone in my life that has a very strong personality. And it's funny watching people react to her because people either love her or they hate her. I'm one of the loving ones. And so, like, when people come out, I was like, I guess I can see that, but like, it comes with this, this, and this. And I personally like strong personalities because I have one. So maybe that's why. But it just goes to show you, it's like, man, if you just open up your perspective to the idea of seeing more, then at the very least, the person becomes human and not just like this object that's encroaching upon you. And when you're telling your story about dog shit versus like the beautiful scenery or the park, I was wondering, how can you, like, what does right perspective mean? Does it mean just looking at just the beautiful around you and just writing off all the negative? And what came to me was, it depends on how you're looking at that. You can look at it and all of a sudden be like, oh my gosh, this city is going to crap and the governor's not doing anything. Or you can look at it and it's like, well, here's my opportunity to be of service if I want. Being of service is one of the greatest things for happiness. How can I clean this up and create the world I want to see? But it's funny, I often play with the idea of like, what is the nature of reality? And different things have been really thought provoking. Like, there's been a few viral clips of Elon Musk saying that it's way more likely that this is a simulation than real life. And it's like, well, what does it mean that something's a simulation? And then what does it mean that our perspective creates our reality, or that our thoughts are constantly creating our reality? Is it just that we tend to hone in on that aspect of what is real? Or is it that we're actually creating something that isn't real at all? And if it's that, then what does that mean? And I once had this dream that I remember I was in this cave, and it was really weird because this was the exact same cave I was in during a plant medicine experience. And I was back there in this dream. And there was this little man telling me that, no, what you need to understand is that everything is happening at once. Every version of the person in front of you, every outcome is all happening at once. And it depends on where your thoughts are, that is what the frequency you will tune into. And I woke up and I still have this theory because it came to me in a dream. And it's like, well, what if that is true? Like, what if I'm angry at my husband and he's being unhelpful this week, and I'm choosing to create the narrative that I have an unhelpful husband? What if I actually just decided to change my thoughts first? And then, as it seems to be, all of a sudden he'll be the most helpful human in the world. And that's just an example I made up. But just like I'm telling you about my reality in my house, and all of a sudden I'm like feeling how beautiful it is, how hard it is to leave. And then I'm like, no, I can't cling either. I just have to be grateful for the present moment and keep moving through it. But it's like, not one of us knows at all for sure what the nature of reality is, maybe until we die. It's like, what if that is the case? What if that's what quantum physics is trying to prove, where there is no reality until there's an observer, and it's just me choosing to observe it from whatever level of consciousness I want to, and then that's what's going to pop out at me. And so what if that is what it means, that we're creating reality with our thoughts as we go? And at the very least, it has done me no harm believing that to be the case. It's only unfolded my life more beautifully. But so often we have this narrative of just like the standard of reality, like what we grew up thinking. And we don't know that it's not so much greater and more magical than that. And if I've chosen to take that perspective. And like I said, it's only created more beauty in my life because that's what I choose to see. So maybe I'm just not seeing as much as the pain. Of course, I have my days, my moments, the times I have to kind of reroute. But when I can live by that, it has really just created a more beautiful life.
That's wonderful. It reminds me of this practice.
Go ahead.
No, it just reminds me of this practice we learned from our friend Jerry Colonna, where, my husband and I, we have this practice where, for example, I wrote about this too. I was going through the living room, like getting the laundry together, right? And I was carrying a bag or something. And Chodo was like across the living room and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I said, and he looked very upset. And I said, "What's the story you're telling yourself right now?" He's like, "You're leaving me." And I said, "Okay, I'm actually just going to do the laundry and glad you can tell me. And I'm not leaving. I'm just going to do the laundry." But this has been like, to me, it's like kind of one of those kind of slicing through our stuff. Cause like, I think these things proliferate in our mind. Like what you're saying about your husband, like you're always like not helpful, like, or you're leaving me, or you're like, we have these like crazy thoughts, which we start to believe. And so the relationally between us has been so wonderful. Just always asking each other, what's the story you're telling yourself right now about this moment? And it just, even that phrasing has been so liberating and helpful and kind of helping with perspective, as we've been talking about, and helps with actually love, that we can even do this with friends, just what's the story you're telling yourself about this situation when someone's, kind of going on and on. And it's been so beautiful and such a beautiful practice.
I usually ask people if there was one thing that you would tell listeners to focus on for this week to really ground this in, what would it be? But I think that is such a great practice, is just as much as you can when you're not feeling good in your body, what is the story that you're telling yourself right now? And so I love the way that your book is laid out because it goes deeper into all of these concepts and how to walk the path. But there's all of these really actionable chapters about how to use things like effort and attention and work as a practice. And so it's kind of like my story of going to the post office and UPS and working with my mind through these very mundane things. And so it shows you how to use your life for your own personal growth. And so for listeners that are interested in learning more about you and that book, where's the best place that they can connect?
So thank you. So the book is called Untangled, Walking the Eightfold Path to Clarity, Courage, and Compassion. And that is sold in ebook and hardback and Audible, anywhere books are sold. And also the book before that is called Wholehearted, Slow Down, Help Out, and Wake Up, which is really about how to live an ethical life and how to examine what you actually value and how are you living those values. And you can find me on Instagram at Koshin Paley Ellison, and the Zen Center is New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care. And it's zencare.org or NY Zen Center on Instagram.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/315. So your challenge for this week is just a contemplative exercise. I want you to ask yourself, how are you building your house of sorrow? Remember what we talked about in the beginning? How ACIM says that there is no neutral thought. Any thought we have is either bringing us closer or further from our divine nature. So often we're looking at our external events, thinking that they're what make us miserable, when in reality, we're building our own houses of sorrow. We're the ones choosing what to focus on. We're the ones entertaining thoughts that have negative consequences. What would happen if you just didn't pay mind to those thoughts? If you gave them less energy? Or better yet, if you rerouted them as soon as you noticed they were coming on? I'm not going to pretend like I have this all figured out. I find myself building my own house of sorrow all the time. But the more I practice, the easier it is to get out of. I have to remind myself that as good as it feels to the ego to drown in my sorrows, I'm not actually doing myself any good. So I challenge you to just play with it. Just play with a new way of being. Remember that Seinfeld episode where George did everything the opposite of how he usually does? Try that for a minute, especially if you aren't happy. And let me know how it goes. Reach out to me on Instagram at MindLoveMelissa. If you love this episode, consider sharing it. You can tap the share button and share it directly with a friend, or screenshot and tag MindLoveMelissa and MindLove Podcast and share it on Instagram. If you want someone to hold your hand and guide you through creating a more intentional life, consider the Mind Love membership. There are dozens of masterclasses on there that help you bring more intention to one area of your life. You can find out more at mindlove.com/membership. You can also find all of my amazing sponsors and their sponsor discount codes at mindlove.com/sponsors. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.